Alright, it's time for the Mercedes video, and I specifically want to address the possibly unique problems facing Mercedes, notes from within that they might still get it wrong, a note on what the technical directives can actually entail, and why Mercedes have the only pair of number one drivers on the grid. So let's get it out the way. The porpoising. Is it gone? No, it can never be gone. What Mercedes themselves report coming out of Canada is that they had gotten to what they considered tolerable range of 2 to 3 Gs on vertical acceleration. And I'd be willing to admit that Canada is perhaps more representative of the types of track topography that the cars will be seeing for the rest of the season. The only other outliers possibly being Singapore, due to it being a traditional street circuit and not a new street circuit. So I would expect bouncing to be back due to having a similar circuit topography to Monaco. The Dutch Grand Prix, because of the bank turns, it's anyone's guess what might happen there. Perhaps nothing at all happens. And then some optional outlier circuits pending what the cars actually do at them, like Spa, Texas, and probably the very next Grand Prix at the time of publishing this, Silverstone. Now yes, it is on record that Mercedes have supposedly solved, quote unquote solved, their porpoising in the build up to this year's British Grand Prix. Reported by Mercedes themselves, albeit I can't recall if a name was tied to that claim, so I'm suspect on its validity. Regardless, it is the circuit itself, not Silverstone specifically, but just various circuits on the calendar, that will speak on whether or not Mercedes have solved their porpoising conundrum, or if they will continue sacrificing health and drivability for speed, which is the supposed trade-off they have been making up until the Canadian Grand Prix. One does ponder why exactly a team gifted with two of some of the best racing drivers on the grid would not lean towards drivability, but just as well it can be chalked up to Mercedes being very, and now demonstrably too, adventurous with the tech they look to implement on their cars. I'm uncertain what the aerodynamic profile of the car actually looks like because it is a wholly unique car. I'm uncertain how to visualize their underbody airflow despite having an image of the detached floor. I'm uncertain what barometer the car is actually being weighed up against and how it fits into the other presented barometers existing on either side of the no man's land that Mercedes find themselves in as far as performance goes. One can theorize this way and that way as to what is actually happening when the car starts porpoising. Perhaps in Silverstone the car will porpoise in the high-speed corners, and my current favorite theory would be blown out the water. Will likewise be interesting to see what lap times the car produces relative to Red Bull and Ferrari, with the likelihood of grid-wide upgrades at Silverstone, with maybe Alfa Romeo not bringing any, but I find this highly unlikely. My current fave idea as to what starts the porpoising is the car encountering a bump, or perhaps a sequence of bumps, that break the flow structures under the car, and when those flow structures reconnect at speed, the car gets flung to the ground. Likewise, a small explosive decompression when the floor reattaches as air gets rapidly forced out the back with a little bit extra air relative to what would be expected in the underfloor area on account of the car's altitude relative to the road height having changed. Some say the floor is flexing, perhaps a suspension misdesign, ride height issues, or what have you. Regardless, if Mercedes do indeed have some way of fixing it while maintaining the concept, then kudos to them. It will be in no doubt that they have the smartest people in the room, and that there are no regulation changes that they cannot face up to. Now, why go through all this technical rigmarole to open the video? Because there are technical directives being discussed right now, and some allegedly conflicting reports from within Mercedes as to how the car is being set up currently. So first thing to note regarding the technical directives being discussed for this season, the regulations themselves cannot be changed, but the FIA can only prescribe how the cars are to be run to the regulations. This is according to Matteo Binotto, I may or may not bother fishing out the quotables. Next year's regulations can be altered within reason, for instance opening up the mass dampener as a legal suspension component again, which is my favorite idea so far on a way to fix porpoising for the formula. Perhaps low cost too, and perhaps even a standard part among the teams manufactured by Renault. Who knows? Second is that according to Sir Lewis Hamilton, Mercedes are already running at maximum ride height. Toto Wolff conflicts this by saying they aren't. How anyone takes that perhaps depends on their fandoms. I would tell you Wolff is not wanting to let teams what the car is actually doing, and Sir Lewis just doesn't consider it a valuable enough piece of information to obfuscate on. Or perhaps Sir Lewis wants that info known so that Braun doesn't let a minimum ride height directive pass. Anyone's guess. I'm not really fussed, as I don't believe a minimum ride height can be implemented anyway, and the Planck wear rate measure is supposedly good enough when paired with quote-unquote tolerable vertical accelerations, whatever the final acceptable numbers will be for the FIA and friends. At least that is all I would expect to be done for this season. I'm not particularly certain how the technical directives might alter development plans going forward. I'm not sure the teams can let a mandate that does that actually pass, because there's already been money in terms of man hours paid to the team's brain trusts in order to theory craft and conceptualize parts that are to come in post Canada's Silverstone. So FIA in a very difficult position. It remains to be seen if teams can even be penalized for breaching whatever the given technical directive is, as they could just argue the cars haven't been designed with it in mind, so at some level it's irresponsible to commit this time to it. But people actually undoubtedly want to know, even perhaps that detail of the directives not even being enforceable in the first place. For how long they're unenforceable is undoubtedly for the teams and the FIA to made out between themselves. Sir Lewis noted a while back that Mercedes could perhaps still get their development wrong going forwards in regards to not having a clear enough path laid out for them. This wouldn't probably be a talking point without the budget caps actually limiting how many design paths can be iterated by the teams. A big part of this is undoubtedly Sir Lewis remaining humble after being so prideful in preseason regarding the brains trust and the team not getting anything wrong. But two things to note here. One, the technical directives, along with whatever is decided upon as a fix for the next or following season, will dictate development directions if teams are not already on a serviceable path for the direction the FIA will take these regulations in anyway. And two, there are doubters who are former Mercedes as to the validity of Sir Lewis Hamilton's technical feedback for engineers. Now, this article came out long before these directives were decided upon, but anyway, Philip Brandl, former Mercedes, has made a claim that Sir Lewis Hamilton is not as technical as Rosberg or Schumacher, and it would be one thing to me if this claim was made 1 or 2 years into his time at Mercedes, but it's been made this year, or perhaps the media apparatus has sat on it until this year/moment, topic for another video. Regardless, to address Brandl, it is academic at this point who does or doesn't have better technical feedback. We know Rosberg is not in the running, unfortunately, despite knowing he would have very good technical feedback. Just go take a look at how he talks about the circuits on his YouTube channel. But it wasn't the case that Nico would better a setup that Sir Lewis figured out for the weekend. And on the balance of averages, it's not even close, and it would be rewriting history to make Nico's outliers his regular level of performance. And regarding Michael Schumacher, he forced number 1 and number 2 setups on teams. Ergo, his teammate, if they ever did find a quicker setup, it would immediately be handed to Michael Schumacher. I'm not suggesting this was still in play when he landed at Mercedes for his second career. But regardless, that team wasn't made a title contender under the spearheadship of Michael Schumacher and Nico Rosberg. One could argue Button can develop a car better with this logic, but I digress. If Rosberg was indeed more technical than Sir Lewis during their time at Mercedes, then it would surely show on the track in more consistent fashion when the car was bad. Assuming both drivers are doing development work on the car, but I digress. Now that this is out of the way, I want to address what the difference between having two number one drivers is when compared with other driver formations of a number one and a faux number one and a number one and number two. It feels like a good time of the season to address this in detail, with Bottas having let slip what it was like being a teammate to Sir Lewis Hamilton. Now Bottas, he was a faux number one driver. He was told he was on equal footing with Sir Lewis, and on principle he was, but on talent and ability and intangibles he was not. And he learned that the hard way while partnered with Sir Lewis. A lot of fans and drivers, because drivers are also fans, those who aren't are outliers, will say things like anyone could do it in that car, quote unquote. And Bottas demonstrates why that's demonstrably untrue. Now I must give Bottas credit, he opens seasons up very well, and his purple patch, or patches, pending his season form, were always commanding drives. Some opening Grand Prix this season were commanding drives, but when faced with having to match the raw and consistent speed, never mind beating it, as he did so on occasion, but to just match the output of a championship contending driver made him consider almost quitting Formula One. He couldn't understand why he was just a bit shy of that ultimate pace and tempo out on circuit, and it almost broke his spirit on account of he himself having believed he could actually compete. I don't blame him for believing. He would have to, otherwise he would never make it to the Mercedes seat to begin with. He was a faux number one, given equal status with Sir Lewis, given the responsibility of a driving consistency that he could not deliver on. Other drivers who have opted into number two roles perhaps realized that sooner in their partnerships or careers relative to the type of teams they wanted to remain at, the likes of Coulthard and Barrichello, albeit Barrichello only took the role begrudgingly, but I digress, similar to Mark Webber. In a setup where there are two number one drivers, they will functionally operate like two number two drivers when not challenging for a championship, doing whatever the team so asks them, even if begrudgingly, and will bank on the team having faith in the drivers to race with no holds barred, when they have worked as a tandem to develop the car while keeping it relevant enough for sponsor payments, an angle that isn't considered all too often. But I digress. But I started considering this as Sir Lewis Hamilton found Mercedes another podium for the season, and the post-race commentary, well, not only on TV but also on the webosphere, shifted from comparing George Russell and Sir Lewis to simply celebrating a good result. There's various other reasons for this shift, but I just found that interesting. It had me considering this exact part of the topic: what is the value of having two number one drivers while not in a title challenging position? Well, this is what I came up with. I'm not sure if it's clicking for people on some unconscious level, or if people are just uncomfortable seeing such a great pair of drivers not actually competing for race wins. These things happen in F1, they don't last too long, but I digress. I don't see either of these two having their spirit quote-unquote broken by the other. Matter of fact, I'm pretty sure Sir Lewis has experienced some type of revitalization on account of looking towards the prospects of some good racing with George Russell, which is perhaps something Nico Rosberg doesn't get enough credit for during his run at the team, considering just how close and tight the racing was on a lot of occasions. Undoubtedly, George has doubters, but every driver has doubters, some more founded than others. Some are on record as saying Verstappen is to be the best of the generation incumbent. Dr. Marco has had his spicy take. I've had my hot take of George Russell being the best of the generation incumbent. It's neither here nor there till the final tallies are in, really. Notably, Pairings has said that it's Verstappen. It's undoubtedly lip service on behalf of Red Bull, but it's not far off the mark. He is the other candidate for best of the incoming generation, but I digress. We shall see how tamed the Mercedes package is as well as how tamed Pairings is as the season goes on. I am definitely expecting some bizarre car behavior from the Mercedes at Silverstone, but we shall simply have to see what the car looks like there. Wolf notably says the car is just stiff and rides ugly instead of actually being perhaps what I have described in regards to porpoising. One wonders what some specific technical minds would conclude about the W13. Maybe they let us know in a book one day, but I digress. So Mercedes, functionally, they have an Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna driver combination. And they're the only ones on the grid that have that type of combination. A lot of people try to put aspirations of that type of driver combination on other driver pairings on the grid, and it's just not of that standard. it's just not of that standard. And really, on a logistical level, there can really only be one of those driver pairings at a time on the grid. It just seems to be the way things fall, if there is going to be one of those driver pairings. But I digress. I was riffing a bit at the end. That's the vid. Peace.
Hell breezy. Let me show you how to keep the dice rolling when you're doing that thing over there, homie. Hey, let's go! Cause I'm feeling like I'm running and I'm feeling like I gotta get away. Better know that I don't and I won't ever stop, cause you know I gotta win every day. Go! See, you really wanna pop me. Go! Just know that you will never flop me. And I know that I gotta be a little cocky. Go! You ain't never gonna stop me. Every time I come, a nigga gotta set it, then I gotta go, and then I gotta get it, then I gotta blow, and then I gotta shut it. Any little thing a nigga think that he be doing, cause it doesn't matter, cause I'm gonna dead it. Then I'm gonna murder everything and anything about it. Boom, about a bing. I gotta do a lot of things to make it clearer to a couple niggas that I always win, and then I gotta get it again and again and again. And I be doing it to death, and now I move a little foul. Nigga better call a rap, and everybody know my style. Niggas know that I'm the best when it comes to doing this, and I be banging on my chest, and I bang in the east, and I bang in the west, and I kinda give you more, and I would never give you less. You will hear it in the street, and you can read it in the press. Do you really want